Don't Drink the Worm. Written by Mike Mann.
And then I told her if she didn't like it, then she could get the fuck out.
Skeeter shouted to the group, recalling the last moments of his latest failed relationship.
If I'm gonna drink, god damn it, I'm gonna drink. Ain't nobody telling me what I can't do.
He motioned his hand to his beard that was drenched in beer foam.
She was getting on my nerves anyway. All I need is my hand.
He cackled, and the men surrounding him joined in. Skeeter Duckett, local masonry repairman and jack of all trades, but master of none. He was born and raised in this small town, and his reputation was as large as his tolerance for alcohol. His liver was made of iron, and the man drank from morning until night. He frequented the bar that was located roughly 2 blocks from his run-down trailer. Somehow, he managed to stay there drinking until he was thrown out around 3 in the morning, and still made it to work on time. Replacing brick and mortar was the main profit of his income for the company that regretfully hired him. Beyond those 10-hour shifts, he would sometimes replace drywall or pour concrete, depending on the request, but it all depended on his motivation. Local handyman and town drunk all rolled into one. He was not hired because he was the best or that his work was perfection. He was hired for the price. Cheapest around, and often did the side jobs for a few bottles of whiskey or a 30-pack of beer. Whatever he could get to fill his gullet. He was rude, obnoxious, and a womanizer. No relationship lasted longer than a week, and it was always due to his drinking habits or lack of hygiene. The last victim of his punch-drunk love left only after 4 days. Skeeter cared not for the loss and went about his days continuing to piss away his money. The townsfolk humored him simply for the cheap labor and the avoidance of his other side. If he ever got angry, then all hell would break loose. He was no stranger to the police station's drunk tank, and would periodically spend a weekend sleeping off whatever alcohol-fueled rage he suffered from. Blackouts ending with bloodied lips and shattered glass down at Gino's bar happened more frequently than the owner liked. Skeeter was an all-out mess, and the town dealt with him like you deal with that annoying cousin you're forced to hang out with during Thanksgiving. He didn't really have friends. Those who were seen in his company were more like acquaintances that got suckered into his never-ending tales of bullshit. But if anyone stuck around long enough, he would reach a point of intoxication that he would start buying whoever was near him free drinks. However, if they left too early or didn't laugh at his jokes, then the rage would surface, and that's when he'd lose control. A big man, almost 7 feet tall and a good 300 pounds. He had a beer belly, but underneath it was pure muscle from the decades of hauling brick and mixing mortar. He was not one to toy with, and this added to the tolerance of everyone who lived in this small town. The company Skeeter worked for only consisted of 6 men and was ran by 2 others. A family-owned business that had been around for a good 80 years. Their work was not the greatest, and Skeeter was at the bottom of that totem pole. But he claimed to be the best mason of them all. His mortar joints were never packed tight, which left holes and bricks cracking. When he laid brick, it was always crooked because he refused to use a level, and when mixing up mortar, it was always too wet to do shit with. So, he was banned from the mixing box for life. He was the second longest running journeyman there, but the younger guys could run circles around him. But with his temper, they had to pretend to be slow and shitty at their job, only correcting his mistakes when he walked away or was not paying attention. Once again, his reputation was the only thing that kept him on the payroll. The boss man tried to fire him once, and that turned into the man being sent to the hospital with a broken jaw, and his company truck being left on blocks. Skeeter was a force to be reckoned with, and no one had the balls to go toe-to-toe with the man. Even when he was caught stealing out of the homes he did repairs on, no one said a damn thing. After finishing the latest job of cutting and repointing the brick walls of the local library, Skeeter made a discovery. There was a section of brick that had fallen thanks to his overpowering force while using a chipping hammer. Everyone else used angle grinders to remove the outdated mortar joints, but Skeeter refused to ever use them. He would rather bust the shit out with force than be covered in mortar dust. Ironic, considering his bathing habits. His refusal to use the proper tools and destroying projects was a constant problem, and the company would have to do extra work not added to the contract in order to fix Skeeter's fuck-ups. When he hit between the brick too hard, a good section fell and revealed a wooden wall beyond. Bricks tumbled to the ground and a cloud of dust invaded the air. After the haze settled and Skeeter calmed his coughing fit, he saw old, worn-out planks crudely placed within the inner wall. The wood smelled of moss, and there was a scent of something dead. The area was very small and crooked, like the wood had been crudely shoved into the cold cement section of the inner wall while it was still wet. There was a rusty latch that held a small door closed, and he opened it without hesitation. It was a secret cabinet of some sort, resembling a stash spot from the olden days. The library was a renovated building that used to be a speakeasy during the Prohibition era, staged as a diner, and this looked to be a secret addition made for hiding. Well, the evidence was there when Skeeter pulled out a dusty bottle filled to the neck with brackish liquid. There was no label of any kind, and it was the only thing in the small crevice. He said nothing to anyone and stashed the bottle in his work bucket, placing it gently inside so to avoid any of his tools cracking the glass. He planned to take it home and drink it after work. No sense in wasting alcohol, and if it was truly that old, it would be strong enough to get him shit-faced. He relayed the brick over the spot in such a fucked up manner that, unknown to him, the guys came back the next day on Saturday to relay the horribly crooked section. When he made it home, he sat down and removed his boots. The stench of his feet made his eyes water a bit, but after a while the smell settled and it no longer bothered him. He grabbed the TV remote and pressed the button to turn it on and sat in his slowly rotting leather chair. Nothing happened, and he sat looking at his reflection within the black box in front of him. "Oh, God damn it!" he yelled out loud, and spit flew from his mouth, falling on his disheveled beard. He ran outside barefoot towards the generator that sat behind the trailer. He poured gas into it until the hole overflowed. He gripped the makeshift wooden handle and pulled it until it growled to life, sending an obnoxious rattling sound that echoed through the trees beyond. He walked back inside and sat down while catching his breath and pushed the button. The TV turned on this time. Skeeter did not pay for electricity, but instead ran a generator that was specifically used for the TV, microwave, and box fan. There was also no running water, which left the man smelling atrocious most of the time, but on occasion he would buy a few jugs of water to wash his hair and balls in the anticipation of a conjugal visit. Aside from that, he had a kerosene lamp he used for light and a cooler packed with ice for his beer and lunch meat. But he would have no problem drinking the beer hot either. Ice-cold beer was a fancy delicacy, so normally his drink was warm like piss. He put on some college football and pulled the old bottle from his bucket to further examine it. The glass of the bottle was a foggy white, and the liquid inside was dark brown with a tint of gold. He sloshed the contents around, and something rose towards the top of the bottle, whirling in the now mini vortex of aged liquor. Skeeter examined it. "What the fuck is that?" A small white form with yellow and green spots swayed within. A worm. "Well, shitfire! We got some tequila for tonight!" He attempted to open the bottle, a rusted metal cap that refused to budge, and sliced his hand. In a fit of rage, he slammed the bottle down, but it didn't break. He rummaged through his tool bucket until he found a pair of vice grips. "I'll get you open, you son bitch!" He made quick work of the rusted metal, and brought the opening of the bottle to his nose. He took a deep inhale, and bile rose from his stomach as the hairs in his nostrils singed.
This ain't no fucking tequila, but god damn, it's strong.
Skeeter was completely out of alcohol in his cooler and was feeling very lazy, refusing to leave the trailer. Finding the bottle was a godsend, even if it was old and smelled like pure gasoline mixed with rubbing alcohol and a smidge of sewage. He looked at the bottle and watched the small, white, cylindrical object descend to the bottom. Without thinking, he took a long drink from it, and when the contents hit his taste buds and flowed through his throat, it burned like the fires of hell, and his eyes began to water.
God damn! Holy shit!
Skeeter began to cough uncontrollably. The taste was like nothing he had ever experienced. There were hints of spiced rum, Everclear, whiskey, and oddly enough, chili pepper. Like taking multiple shots and biting into a spicy bowl of canned chili. After wiping his eyes and blowing his runny nose into a rocket of snot that splattered on the floor, Skeeter took another long drink. The exact same thing happened, but this time he could taste copper along with the burn of ghost pepper.
Did they make this shit with scraps of veggies and leftover shots?
Skeeter had a tendency to talk to himself when he was alone. He paused to roll up a cigarette from the leftover butts in the ashtray in a rolling paper. After twisting the paper and lighting one end with a match, he looked at the bottle. A burning sensation was stirring in his stomach that caused it to rumble. He had not eaten all day and searched the cooler for something to snack on. Skeeter moved his hand through the lukewarm water at the bottom and grabbed a bag. Inside were 2 slices of warm bologna. Without any consideration of the consequences, he ripped the bag open and inhaled the meat. With something in his stomach, Skeeter brought the bottle back to his lips and took another long drink. Essence of fermented vegetables and the bite of its potency left snot running out of his nostrils. More coughing echoed inside the trailer, followed by screaming.
God damn! Every time this shit kicks my ass!
He was both dumbfounded and excited by the reaction his body had with the alcohol. There was no doubt this stuff was old, and the age of it had created a concoction strong enough to remove paint. By this time, he had already consumed half the bottle. He gazed inside, looking at the floating white shape that did not move unless the liquid was disturbed. Skeeter remembered hearing about certain tequila brands that had a small worm in it, and there were rumors that if you ingested it, you would hallucinate.
What kind of shit can you make me see?
Skeeter addressed the worm that was spinning in the bottle as he swayed it in his hand. The liquor was kicking in. That warm, fuzzy sensation was taking over, and the world began to spin. A few more swallows, and soon all that was left was a bit of liquor mixed with backwash, and the little white shape settled at the bottom. With one eye fixated on the sad creature, Skeeter held it up to the flame of his lantern and spoke in a drunken slur.
Well, bottoms up, you little fuckle.
He chuckled under his breath, burping a bit with the sting of acid reflux rising from his stomach. He brought the bottle up, and in a single gulp, Skeeter finished it off and swallowed the grubby worm whole. The burning of the random peppers sent a fury of fluids expelling from multiple parts of his body, and the man ended up pissing himself before falling asleep. Drool and snot leaving a long, slimy trail in his beard that became crusty as time passed and the sun rose. Skeeter woke up the next day feeling like pure shit. That entire weekend, Skeeter felt the repercussions of drinking an old bottle of alcohol he found stashed in the walls of an old building. Needless to say, his side job was canceled. He was sweating nonstop and every 10 minutes was running outside to shit in the woods. Being that he never paid for water, the plumbing in his trailer was completely useless. He headed to Gino's bar later that night, but his stay there was short-lived after he puked all over a table and shit his pants, forcing the owner to throw him out. His body was weak, so there was no fighting the eviction, and he just stumbled his way back home. Sunday night was spent with Skeeter staying in his dirty mattress and sweating off the alcohol. He never got a full amount of sleep. Every few hours he woke up to either vomit, piss in a bottle, or run to the woods to paint a tree with his feces. At one point, he had no time to run outside and was forced to use his non-functioning toilet. After he finished, Skeeter felt a strange sensation in his right eye. He continued to rub it in order to remove the sensation, but it did no good. He went to the cooler and filled a cup with the warm water and took it to the bathroom. Under the light of a kerosene lamp, he stood in front of the mirror and used the water to ease the weird feeling. It burned, but was itchy, as if something was digging at it. He took a closer look at his eye, and it was bloodshot with the bottom lid being swollen. He pressed at it, and pus oozed out and fell into the sink. He looked down at what fell from his eye, and the small spot began to shift. "Huh?" Skeeter mumbled as he brought the lamp closer to the sink. At the bottom was a glob of yellow pus, and inside, something was moving. Looking back at the mirror, he saw more shit oozing out to fall towards the sink. He panicked and splashed water on his face and did his best to flush out his eye. He pressed hard on the swollen lid until every drop of the infected liquid expelled out and into the drain. He looked again and the swelling was gone, but the blood vessels in his eye had busted in multiple areas. He rubbed at it to ease the burn, but it did nothing. Skeeter became frustrated. "Fuck this! I'm going to bed." He dumped the rest of the water in the sink, and he watched all the disgusting pus flow down. He stopped when he saw multiple white things wriggling around in the water, but they fell to the darkness of the drain before he could get a full examination. He let out a fart and stomped his way back to bed, not looking forward to the first day's week of work. Monday morning, Skeeter struggled to get up and move. He was groggy as hell and drenched in sweat. The wind from the fan hit his wet and slimy back, causing a chill to run up his spine. He jolted up to avoid the cold, standing up and stretching his arms until his palms pushed against the ceiling. He walked towards the kitchen sink and let his bladder loose to flow down the drain, scratching at multiple areas of his body. He scooped up more water from the cooler and dumped it into the sink to avoid the lingering scent of urine. He stumbled back to his room and started to get dressed. After he put his pants and boots on, Skeeter reached for the shirt on his bed and paused after grabbing it. In the spot where he had slept was a large wet area, and in the center was a pile of something white that moved. He crept closer and strained his eyes to see what the white form was. He yelled when he realized what he was looking at.
"What in the hell? What is that?"
Upon closer examination, he knew he was looking at a pile of worms, shifting and rolling around in his sweat-drenched mattress. They were more like maggots, white pulsating forms littered with yellow and green dots. They looked exactly like the one in the bottle that he had swallowed whole. Skeeter stood in silence, unsure of how to process this. The small pile began to expand and spread over the wet spot. Small, squishing sounds could be heard in the silence. In a panic-stricken rage, Skeeter stomped on his bed. His foot bounced up and down with the springs, sending some of the grub-like worms to fly in the air, while others became a smushed mash of yellow and black ichor. He continued until nothing remained of their original forms. Afterwards, he grabbed a rag and attempted to scoop up the mess and throw it outside. He would deal with the stain later when he came back. He was running late, and he had to rush to work. The drive there, all he could see were those disgusting things moving around in his bed, and he began to dry heave. Areas of his arms burned, and he had to swap which hand held the steering wheel so he could scratch at it. All day he did his best to not think about the worms, and focused on repointing the foundation blocks of the municipality building. But the periodic burn of his skin was beginning to piss him off, and he kept having to pause his work and dig his disgusting nails into his flesh. That feeling somehow coincided with the shit he saw on his bed, and eventually led him to thinking about the bottle he found. Soon his stomach began to act up, and he was left jumping off the scaffolding to run to the porta-john. Skeeter burst into the plastic facility and in a haste dropped his pants and let loose.
Shit! God damn it!
He yelled as he felt the burn of hot magma shoot out of his ass. The echoes from below caused an uproar of splashing, and sweat began to bead off his forehead. After an eternity of releasing his bowels, Skeeter finally rose and searched for some toilet paper out of the dispenser, but found none.
Oh, fuck it!
He spat as he pulled up his pants and zipped up his fly. He returned to his area and continued his work. During lunch break, one of the young bucks came out of the porta-john screaming.
Who blew up the shitter? And why the hell are there a bunch of maggots wriggling around the turds?
Skeeter said nothing as he felt gurgling in his stomach. He panicked inside, thinking that the worms came from him. He felt sick and no longer wanted to be at work. All he wanted to do was leave and drink himself into a blackout. Skeeter was able to push through the 10 hours and was finally home. He walked into his bedroom and saw that the spot where he killed the worms was still there, a nasty stain left in the center of the bed. The image resurfaced of the little fuckers rolling in his sweat, and he scratched at his arms. He lifted up the mattress and flipped it over so he would no longer have to look at it. He didn't bother putting any blankets or pillows on the bed. Instead, walked out and drove towards Gino's. After a few threats of a beatdown, the owner let Skeeter in to drink all night. No one sat near him after what happened the other night, but they also didn't mention the incident of him spewing chunks and shitting himself. He didn't mind and preferred to sit alone, trying to drown out the thoughts of the nasty shit he had dealt with. Soon, a foggy glaze covered his sight, and the warmth of the liquor gave him a bit of comfort. A few $100s later, he made his way back home to watch TV and sit in his chair. He stopped to get a pack of cigarettes and a 12-pack of beer before going home. Making sure he had what he needed to enjoy the rest of the night, he ate wings at Gino's so he didn't need to worry about food. He stared at the TV that was playing some oddball comedy in the wee hours of the night, and he felt his eyes getting heavy. Skeeter contemplated on calling off of work as he scratched at every surface of skin that burned. Sleep began to take over him, and eventually he passed out in the chair. The generator ran itself dry, leaving the trailer silent with the flame of his lantern the only thing illuminating the spot where the man slept.
Fuck!
Skeeter screamed with immense pain shooting at the bottom of his stomach. He rose up from his chair and ran out the door towards the woods, sunlight breaking above the treetops. He knelt down to a squatting position with his pants around his ankles, and wailed as he let the contents of his stomach exit out of his lower half. The burn from the experience was unbearable, and he prayed that it would all stop. After a few minutes, the flow of excrement stopped its exit. He stood up, afraid to look, but did it anyway. A large puddle of brown and red. At the center was a squirming pile of white things. The pile consisted of those same maggot-like worms, but this time it was triple in size, and the things were spreading faster, with some burrowing into the ground. Skeeter could not handle looking at his own filth, and ran back to his trailer. He sat at the corner of his living room, his knees pressed against his chest as he rocked back and forth.
What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is wrong with me?
He remained like this for half an hour before he got up to search around for his cigarettes. He lit one up, and the sensation of his stomach returned.
No! Not again! Please!
The gurgling was painful, and his mouth began to water, drool running out and spilling onto his beard. He could feel something in his stomach moving around, tiny shifting sensations that tickled different areas within his stomach. He wanted to push his hand into his insides and stop the feeling. It made him nauseous as he imagined those creepy crawlers wriggling around inside of him. The movement in his belly caused him to feel like he was going to vomit or shit himself, and he scrambled to the cooler in search for a beer. That was his answer to everything. Any problem could be solved with alcohol. He cracked open the warm can and chugged the piss-warm liquid until there was nothing left. A loud belch erupted from his belly and a burn hit his throat, and soon the gurgling got worse along with the internal squirming of his guts.
Oh fuck. No.
He couldn't stop it now. Something was going to exit his body. He ran out, and before making it past the door, Skeeter began to vomit the beer he had just chugged. Snot and tears fell from his face to mix with the liquid and bile that hit the ground. Regret filled his mind with every heave. White, throbbing worms joined in the mixture that expelled from his mouth. The whole experience was gut-wrenching, and he could feel liquid running down his leg. Soon, sharp stings pecked at the wet portions of his legs. Skeeter rushed inside to remove his pants in hopes to stop the pinching. His legs were wet with piss, and tiny red spots littered his flesh all over. He looked down at his pants, and more of those small little white things were squirming off of the folded denim and dropping in the dingy carpet.
What the fuck?
His words pausing with slow burps in between. He removed the rest of his clothes until he was only in his underwear. Skeeter took his jeans and threw them outside, and they landed on the pool of vomit and worms that were spreading and making their way back towards the opening of the trailer. He yelped when he felt more stinging on his unmentionable areas. The center of his underwear was still soaked in his urine, and he could feel things moving around. He panicked and ripped the stained garment off and tossed it outside as well. He rushed to his room and pulled out clothing from a pile and dressed in haste. In a few moments, he was in his truck and headed to the nearest store. The entire drive, all he felt was the burning of his skin that itched like crazy, and he almost ran off the road as he tried to scratch at his legs. While at the store, he bought 4 jugs of water, a bottle of whiskey, a 6-pack of beer, and a pack of cigarettes. When he made it back home, he dumped the 3 jugs into the tub in the bathroom and poured bleach in the water. He poured a bit of dish soap into the mix and used the last jug to dump in it in order to stir up the concoction. He placed the alcohol and cigarettes at the edge of the tub before removing his clothes and slowly descending into the water. As he placed himself at the bottom of the tub, a jolt of electricity hit his body from the cold of the water. He began to take handfuls of liquid and splash it all over his itching body. The bleach in the water started to burn the growing red spots that covered his legs and genitals. After dousing his wounds, Skeeter popped the top of the whiskey and began to drink. The harsh liquid filled his stomach, and he felt the comforting burn. He gagged a little as he set the bottle down. He lit up a cigarette and let himself soak for a while. More pain shot in his body, and he looked down at his legs. Blood was leaking out from every spot, and it seemed that the tiny specks had now become holes the size of a pencil eraser. The pain increased, and Skeeter drank more in hopes that it would numb the pain. Soon the bottle was gone, and half of the beer had been finished. With a burning cigarette between his fingers, Skeeter began to doze off. The alcohol had done its job and left the sensation of pain to lift and fade. Moments later, and he was asleep, but the slumber merely lasted minutes before he abruptly woke up. A searing ache infected his skin, and the unsettling movements in his stomach returned. The cigarette fell into the water and died with a hiss as it became soaked in the tub. He panicked, thinking the cherry would burn him, and he rushed his hands to grab the butt. He was relieved after realizing the water put it out, but he noticed the tub was now filled with red liquid. The spots on his body now resembled massive zits with pulsating white heads at the surface that were expanding out of his flesh. They burned like hell, and he soon began to try and squeeze out the pus. Fuck. Skeeter spoke between clenched teeth as he used his fingers to squeeze each end of the nasty acne like whelps. No pus exploded from the spot, and he felt movement under the section of skin he was squeezing on. He bit his lip as he took his long and dirt-encrusted nails to rip open the stubborn zit. To his horror, when he did so, there was a fat, wriggling white maggot that was ripped from the open sore. Anxiety riddled his body, and he felt vomit rushing to the back of his throat. In a fit of panic and frustration, Skeeter scratched at every inch of his infected body, releasing an army of those white parasites. When they dropped in the water, they began to squirm their way to the surface. Skeeter stood up and continued his fury of self-mutilation until every white spot had been removed from the sores. He hopped out to look at a tub filled with a school of white maggots shifting around in the diluted blood pool. The sight was disgusting. The thought of these things coming out of his body made him lightheaded, and his blood ran cold. His stomach churned, and he began to retch without any time to stop it. A dark green liquid hurled from his mouth into the tub and mixed, adding even more white forms to join the mass. Hundreds of these nasty little fuckers had taken over the tub and were floating. Skeeter wiped his face and beard before putting his clothes back on, the fabric stinging the open sores of his legs and genitals. He started to walk out and paused to look at himself in the mirror. He was pale, and his eyes were completely encased in busted blood vessels. Tears of red began to fall, and as he looked closer, his eyeballs were growing out of their sockets. The orbs continued to grow in size, slowly popping out beyond the lids. Small holes formed around the cornea. White specks were jutting out of the red, and soon small fibers burst outward in a flurry that covered his face. Screams echoed from the trailer as Skeeter clawed at his face. The more he dug, the more blood fell to the sink, and with it came slender versions of the white maggots that were floating in the tub. These ones resembled the kind you find when deworming a puppy, long and thin creatures that rolled around in the crimson puddle that settled in the sink. The pain he was inflicting on himself sent jolts of fire to burn in his skull, but the feeling of those things moving around in his eyes was worse. In a sheer force of will, he forced his fingers into his eye sockets and pulled out the hole-ridden spheres one at a time, throwing them down on the floor and blindly stomping on them with his bare feet. He saw only black, but could feel the constant flow of blood and worms falling from the vacant holes in his face. The pain radiated, and he felt more movement in every portion of his body. Small shifting pulses under his skin that traveled everywhere, and he could feel his hair falling from the follicles and replaced with more slender worms that pushed themselves out. He was sweating as he cried and dropped to his knees. As the beads of sweat forced their way through his pores, he could feel small, wiggling things push out with the perspiration. He rubbed his hand across his face, and when he brought his hand down, in his palm there could be felt a dozen squirming forms moving across his skin. Fuck! Why? Skeeter muttered to himself before falling flat on the floor. Shifting inside, his stomach attacked him with severe nausea and greater amounts of pain. It felt like a snake was roaming around inside of his intestines, with little babies hatching out of eggs and biting at his insides. The gurgling returned, and he began to spew vomit that coated his beard with fluid and things that burrowed under the hair. His bowels let loose, and he felt the snake-like creature coil inside his gut. Pain radiated on every spot of his body, and Skeeter begged any god that was listening to help him. But his prayer was not answered as he felt a tear in his belly. The creature was writhing violently, and he felt it chew at his guts until a head burst through the skin. Soon, another massive form forced itself out of his rectum in a burst of blood and shit. Skeeter screamed in agony, but the sound was quickly stifled by another large and bulbous mass shooting from his throat and out his mouth. His body gave way to a dozen large creatures that emerged from every orifice. Fat, corrugated grubs the size of pythons, white with green and yellow spots covering the tops of their restless bodies, surrounded Skeeter. During the night, Skeeter's corpse released a plague of those hideous creatures. Forms of every length and girth escaped, and soon the ones in the tub had grown long enough to slide out and shimmy towards the center of the bathroom. Gleaming black fangs protruded out of an open end of the larger ones that had burst out of Skeeter while he was still alive. A set of 4 at each side of the circular opening, they drove these things into the flesh and consumed the leftover fluids before devouring the muscle tissue. Medium-sized ones burrowed through the flesh to eat the remnants of the internal organs. The walls of the trailer were filled with the sickening sound of chewing, followed by loud crunching. The man's skin and bones had been broken down to mush by the largest of the white abominations, while the smaller maggot-sized parasites slurped up the leftovers of his body. By morning, nothing remained of the man except for the clothes he was wearing that were torn to shreds. The destroyed fabrics were surrounded by blood, shit, vomit, and slender trails of yellow slime. It would be a week before anyone checked on Skeeter. They found his clothes in the tub full of blood, but no sign of the man or the disgusting things that his body had incubated. No real investigation was done. No sign of a break-in, but there was a strange trail of blood that led out the bathroom towards the front door. The people in town chalked it up to a bad fight or an animal attack, but with Skeeter's reputation, no one went out of their way to find him. In fact, most of the people rejoiced with the notion that the dirty monster had finally left them and their town for good.